JD.
Good morning, Jim. How's it going?
Good. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Did you have a good weekend?
I did. Yeah. We talked about something really, really cool, and we're going to keep talking about it today.
Yeah. So we're in our churches. We're in a series where we're looking at Christianity 101, or Christianity for Dummies, as we call it. No, I don't know. Do you call it that?
I keep saying Church 101, Christianity 101. It's pretty much just like the basic building blocks. I really think our bumper video encapsulates it. Like, we're going back to school, basic building blocks.
Right.
And so everything that we're going to talk about is going to keep laying the foundation of our faith.
Yeah, but we got in some questions that they don't tie into what we did on Sunday, but they inform, the basics of the faith. And so we're going to look at a few questions today that were submitted. So
yeah, one of those questions is, who is God?
Who is
God?
That's a big question, right?
It is a big question.
Yeah, who is God? I mean, is it, where did God come from?
Well, when you ask who is a person, so for example, if I said, who is Jim?
Yeah.
What do you think someone would say, or what would you say, or one of your friends? If you said, who is this person? What do we use to describe people?
Well, you what do you know about that person? And how have you interacted with that person? And do they seem to be honest? Do they seem to be a person of integrity? Are they a jerk? I mean, it's all of that stuff. And so I think that question, who is God? Man, that's a huge question. We know some things from Scripture about who God is, the nature of God. In fact, Paul in Romans tells us that everything we need to know about God is like laid out in nature for us to see. His divine, his order and his character, all of those things are laid out. But who, can you know this God? I mean, maybe that's another one of the questions that I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Well, and I think that's a lot of people claim to know God or to know God fully, and I would just pump the brakes immediately. I don't think we can fully know God because everything that JD knows is limited into this tiny little head skull right here. Sure. Whereas the God of the universe, it was really cool. About 4 weeks ago, we watched this video, one of these little clips on YouTube, of them zooming out from the Earth. Have you ever seen that video where it sort of zooms out of the Earth and then it shows, Jupiter, and then it shows the sun, then a bigger sun, then the galaxy? Anyways, it's like this 2-minute video, but it really puts into perspective that the universe is massive. And so this God that created everything and is sustaining everything, we cannot know who God is fully. Because he is so much bigger, than we are. And so we can't comprehend that. One of the ways that helped me really understand this question, who is God? Because like you said, it's all about characteristics. Pulling from the Reformed tradition, there's 2 ways that we can know about God: general revelation and special revelation. So general revelation is what you talked about. What Paul is saying is that we can know God through nature. I think it's in Romans 1 or Romans 2, how it's, it's set in our hearts. We, going for a nice long walk in nature, we can sense God's presence. We can ascertain certain characteristics of God. And so that's general revelation. And then special revelation is what we read in the Bible. Yeah. What we understand from Jesus. That's not necessarily ascertained through nature, but through this gospel that's passed down from us. And so it's sort of like picking these tiny things. Hey, I know this about God, or this, or I think I know this, that we try to pull from all these sources to put together this picture of who God is. What are some of the main characteristics of God? If someone says, who is God? You've experienced God, for a long time. What would you say some of the characteristics? Is he angry? Is he kind? Is he loving? Is he hateful?
Yeah. I mean, that's, again, massive question. I almost want to back up first. And before we get to that, I almost want to, so on Sunday at Blue Mountain, I talked about, from the book of John, it starts and says, the Word was with God and the Word was God. In the beginning was the Word. And the word is logos. And logos, basically, I define it as the defining ruling principle of the universe. So the word, a lot of times in Christianity, when we talk about the Word, we're talking about the Bible, right? And so this is not the Bible when we say the Word. We're talking about the logos, which is the divine ruling principle of the universe. So the one who took out of chaos and created order. And so we were on vacation this summer, and we were in the Olympic National Park, and we were up on Hurricane Ridge, and they had these telescopes out, and we're looking at, here's our universe, and here's, here's Saturn. And then if you look over here, you can see this other universe that is, so many millions of light years away, and it's billions of stars, and it's just as big as the Milky Way. And then it's hard to imagine that there's billions of universes exactly like, And so as you just kind of start to wrap your mind around that as much as you can, just from what you're seeing, God, how can I understand or describe a God who could create order out of chaos? I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know where to start.
And it almost feels it almost feels like we don't deserve to even describe God. Like it's almost like we're treading on holy ground, trying to describe the indescribable, right? There's almost a sense of awe when truly experiencing God. I think what I've experienced in my life, I think God is very, very confusing. Yeah. And the only way that I really know how to know certain things about God is just looking at Jesus.
Yeah, right. Right, because Jesus said, if you have seen me, you've seen the Father. And so, God is really complicated, but if we know Jesus, then there's something we can grasp onto, something we can understand.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because Jesus doesn't live here and now, but again, we can pour through the scriptures. I also believe, and not just believe, but I've experienced it. We can also experience Jesus today in a relationship with him today.
Sure.
And that can help us at least on this pursuit. So saying who is God, anyone who comes to you with an exact answer is full of it. Who is God is something we're learning our whole lives, right? So we might be able to say certain things about God, but at least I know that's something that I'm learning as I'm trying to chase after Jesus and learn more about him, because that's that's who God is. Jesus is God. And so we're trying to know who Jesus is more. And even though, Jesus is all laid out in scripture. No, Jesus is in essence, he is a person and a God. And so in God, so we're learning just like a relationship. Like I'm learning new things about my wife every single day, just like any true relationship. Knowing who God is, it takes a long period of time.
And we catch, if you put all of scripture together, we have just the tiniest bit of information about God, although it's everything we need to believe. I mean, we have everything we really need to know about God in the scripture or in our experiences in life. But to say who is God, I used to have a roommate who we would kind of torment him because I shouldn't tell you this. We would torment him. We'd say, where did God come from? And that would just, he would just set him into a spiral.
Because it doesn't make logical sense.
Yeah.
But so
who is God?
Who is God? One thing, at least that I'm convinced of, I think God is loving.
Yeah.
I've experienced that in my life, as well as God is a God of grace.
And just.
He's just and strong and powerful.
Yeah. And I think you've already touched on it. I mean, you've already said it. Knowing Jesus is the thing we need to know about God to understand his nature, because we can really insert our impression of what God might be like, but as we see Jesus and the way he carried himself and his interactions, then we understand more about God than we ever did before.
Yeah, so. And most people that I know that have a negative view of God have been hurt, whether it's by the church or by family members that they look up to.
Yeah.
They've been hurt by those relationships in the past. And so it really speaks to how we get to know God is through a relationship with him. And oftentimes our view and perception of God can be damaged because our relationship with someone else, is damaged. And so a lot of times we put that on to God, and we blame him, or we think that God, so one of the questions is why does God seem angry? And there's a lot of several stories that break my heart. People who think God's an angry God, but it's because they experienced people who are judgmental in the church who are very angry at them and not showing the grace and the mercy of Jesus. But what they do then is they say, well, these people are following God, they're Christians, and they're treating this way, so then God must be this way. Or my family members who are Christians or believers, and they treat me this way, so God must be this way. And so there's a lot of this baggage that's put on God.
Well, and a lot of evil has been done in the name of God, right? A lot of violence, a lot of oppression, just a lot of suffering. And I did this because God told me, or
do you think God is an angry God?
No. I think God, I think God expects us. Okay, so I think we don't understand what humans are. Whoa, where did that come from? I think if we understood what humans are, we probably would understand more what God is. And because we struggle to understand what we are, I think we can't even get close to understanding what God is. And so do I think God's angry? No, I don't. But I think God has every right to be angry, but I don't see life playing out that way. But we live with a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, and we attribute a lot of our suffering to God. A lot of the pain, especially when somebody says, well, God's doing this to me. And in fact, if I'm suffering, a lot of times I might say, well, God, why did you allow this to happen? Or God, why are you doing this? And I attribute my suffering to God. God must be angry at me because, look, I'm going through this really hard thing, or I've lost family, or I've, whatever. But I think that's not always the case. I mean, I think sometimes our suffering is part of the living on a fallen world, and under a curse.
And I think I think Jesus really helped clear that up for us. What I go back to is the parable of the prodigal son. So I struggle with that, thinking God's angry at me, disappointed in me. But in the parable of the prodigal son, there's this father who has this big inheritance, and the son is like, I wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance. I'm going to go out and I'm going to party. And that's what he does. In his life, he ends up spending all his money, and his life is just in the gutter, and he's just completely biffed it. And then when he comes back, the father is waiting for him and throws him this massive party. And so God is not angry. He is waiting for us with open arms. He's probably like, hey, I told you, like, you're just missing out, on this rich life that I have prepared for you. But there's not an angry God waiting for us. Like I think people are afraid of turning towards God because they're afraid it's going to be an angry face looking back, but it's quite the opposite. It's a face that's begging you to come towards him, full of love and full of grace.
So there was a sermon preached, like 100 and some years ago, called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." And that, this remember.
Well, yeah, it's Jonathan Edwards, and this is in public. I learned about this in public school, so this is actually the image of God that everyone, at least from a certain time period in the United States, got taught. But anyways, go on.
Yeah, so this idea that one sermon, in what today would be a fairly small church, but it got distributed, and it became like our impression of this God, and it was kind of a scare tactic to cause people to fear for their souls, and for good or for bad, because I think there is some of that's fair in that if we're not in a right relationship with God, then our souls stand in danger in many ways. But at the same time, this is the God who's ready to crush you as soon as you step out of line, and somehow that became our impression of who God is as a culture. But when we see the wrath of God in Scripture, most of the time we see the wrath of God, and that is God seems to withdraw his presence, or not his presence, but his discernible presence from people. So in Romans, you mentioned Romans, we talked about Romans a second ago, that God's wrath was poured out against these people, and he gave them over to a depraved mind, and he gave them, and they forgot what they knew about God. They forgot the knowledge of God. And basically, the wrath of God looks like God saying, okay, if this is what you want, if you want to go on without me and be without me, I'll pull back and allow you to go in the direction you want to go. So it's not that God's wrath is throwing lightning bolts and cursing us with disease and plagues. It's more that God says, okay, if that's what you want,
have at it.
Have it. But I'm here like the prodigal son. I'm here, and if you turn to me, I'll welcome you back. But we lose memory of God. And
well, what you said, I want to rewind back just 5 minutes. You said that we need to know who we are too. And I think that I totally agree with how you're laying this out, that God's wrath is him withdrawing. Because if we are all by ourselves without God, what does that show you about who we are? It shows the deep sin and how terrible of people we are on the inside. You know, if God's wrath truly is letting us go about our own way, and then it always ends in this tragedy where we're messing stuff up, where we're killing each other, and this violence and these depraved mindsets, then that shows that it's not God that's the problem. It's always been us. You know, that's the problem. And that's a really countercultural statement, that we are broken on the inside and we are bad people deep down. Like, that's countercultural. Culture doesn't tell us that now. Culture tells us you're beautiful. You know, you have your truth. You know, you're full of goodness. You can do whatever you want. But no, who are we? Yeah. No, we are broken, sinful, bad people.
Yeah. You know, if I could oversimplify it, I think that the life that we have on earth is kind of learning how to be human. You know, and Jesus told us that loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. These are the two greatest commandments. If we could learn to love God with everything in us, and if we could learn to love our neighbor as ourselves, that's what it is to be human at the the lowest common denominator, is we love God and people. And but that's a high bar in our culture and in our world. But for God, that's human. You know, that's the bottom. Yeah. All right. So then there was another question. Am I really made in the image of God? What do you think about that question?
I think everyone is made in the image of God, and it's sort of hard to reconcile these two, that one, we are broken, sinful, fallen people. Not just sins, lowercase, that we do sins, but we suffer from sin, that we are sinful, that we are poisoned and sick. But at the same time, we also are made in the image of God. And so it's hard to hold those two in balance, but I think that we have to. Because again, I think that that's what Jesus shows us. So this might be an easy one to write off. No, I'm not made in the image of God. You know, I'm aware of my sin. I'm aware of how broken I am. I'm not made in the image of God. But what Jesus shows us is, no, you are made in the image of God. Jesus showed that in word. But what I always like to do is, let's look at deed. What did Jesus do? You know, because there's a lot of wise religions with leaders that say stuff. But what did Jesus do? Jesus spoke to the lowest. He hung out with the lowest in society, those who felt like they weren't made in God's image, those who weren't even allowed into the temple to worship God because they were so cast out. And that's the lepers, the prostitutes, the tax collectors. These are the people that Jesus hung out with. And I think that just says everything. You know, the fact that church people got mad at Jesus because he was hanging out and treating these people like they were made in the image of God, at least to me, that you know, says everything.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yeah. So I mean, you know, Genesis opens up and God makes humanity, and he says, "Let us make man in our image," or humanity in our image. And so, you know, the story, the right from the very start, is that yes, humans are made in the image of God, and I think humans are different than any other thing we know of in creation. You know, in terms of the animal kingdom, we're different. You know, we there's some things about us that's just, I mean, we might share DNA with, I don't know, whatever, monkeys, chimpanzees, orangutan, whatever, but we're different in that our essence is just totally, you know, monkeys probably, I've never been able to ask one, but they probably don't sit around and think about, you know, the future, and they don't think about, you know, leaving a legacy or kindness, and I don't know what they think about. Yeah, but there's something about us.
Yeah, it's God's breath into us. You know, that's how He, you know, made Adam, made Eve. It's God's breath, and as long as we have breath, we're made, you know, in God's image.
Yeah, but but Satan wants to remake us in his image too. And so, we have a choice. Do I lean into Jesus and try to allow God to, Jesus as an example, not just Jesus as a Savior, but Jesus as an example of this is what a human life looks like. Do I allow God to make me in the image of his Son, or do I allow life and the world and everything else to make me in the image of something lesser, Satan or anything really?
Yeah.
And so we're either becoming, in a sense, more human, which is made in the image of God, or less human, in my mind. Yeah.
And I think that's the cool part about Jesus, is that he shows us who God is, but he also shows us what it means to be human, what it means to be. This is what God, designed for humanity to look like, for us to look like, is Jesus right here. And that's why, it doesn't make necessarily logical sense, but it's just the coolest thing ever, is that, for looking at who is God and who are we supposed to be, what are humans supposed to be. That's why we're chasing after Jesus, every day, just trying to get to know him more and more, because that's how we answer these questions. And I don't see any other way as to how we're going to answer these besides trying to continue to develop that relationship and ask.
Have you ever known somebody or seen somebody that there was almost no image of God left in? They almost had fallen away so far that there's almost nothing good left in them.
So I think everyone still has that tiny piece. But like you were saying earlier, what it means to be human is those two rules, to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Right. And there's people that have just completely rejected those two notions, who completely and entirely reject God and the sanctity of his image in everyone. And then they only live life for themselves, so they're not loving others as they love themselves, or loving themselves as they love themselves. And so, I think I don't know if sense is the right word, but there's definitely are those people. We see them in history. We might meet them today where, you can tell, hey, something's just not, I don't know. What would you say? Have you met?
I think I have, but I think of I'm trying to remember, was it, there was a mass killer. Was it Jeffrey Dahmer? I can't remember which one it was.
Just one of the mass murderers.
Yeah, and then he was in prison, and he started to reflect on the killing that he had done, and that he was evil at his core. I don't think it was Jeffrey Dahmer, but anyway, I think we can allow ourselves to withdraw into evil places, and yet, in moments of honesty, which we all have, in those moments of greatest honesty, he understood that where he was and where he had gone was evil. And so God can even catch us in those moments of honesty and help us to come to terms with where we are, and even that he still loves us and wants to draw us back out of that. Yeah. So I think that spark is still there, but man, there are times when it looks like it's almost gone out in somebody.
Yeah. So there's a quote, I think it's Corey Temin, that says, "There's no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper." Yeah. Some of us dig really deep pits, but thankfully God's love is deeper. So Monday matters. Who is God? Say someone wants to know more about this God. Say someone wants to, we talk about following Jesus, learning about Jesus. How do you do that? How do you find out practical basics? If I want to know more about who God is, what do I do?
Great question. I think, I think in a church setting, we talk about God, we teach about God, we seek to follow God. In a church setting that, where we're, it's hard to follow a God you can't see. It's hard to follow a God you can't, you can't hear audibly and that type of thing. But we do see God's activity in people's lives around us. We see the scriptures. We see him at work we see his fingerprints all around us. And so, I think being a part of a healthy church community is really critical to finding and following God.
And then you can be around people who've been following him for longer, people who might be here on their walk with God, and I'm here, at step one. And so then they can help feed little tidbits. And I really like that you're saying that, because a lot of times we want to just be self-sufficient. But I know, at least in my life, I don't see God working at all. And then I talk to someone who's a lot older and wiser than I am. They say, dude, God worked here. God's imprint is on this scenario, and you don't realize this. And it's like, whoa, it's stuff that I might not see how God's working in my life, but other wise people are able to point that out. And that's how it's been since the beginning. Yeah. We've always been meant to pursue God together. It's never meant to be. Now, we can pursue him alone, and if that's our circumstance, but it's always meant to be in this community. And even if you are alone, you're not, because we're pursuing him together in spirit.
So I think that, especially today in our culture, it used to be somebody would give a message and you get saved and then you start following God. I think today it works a little different for the most part. I think people kind of belong before they believe, and they start to, gather around other people, and then, I'm around you, and you seem to have this thing with, you seem to know God, and so I start to talk to you, and we start to, and you start to explain, and next thing you know, I caught it, and I started somewhere along the line to believe too, and then I realized I've crossed this line into faith, and so I think you're right that it's a communal thing, and it's really important that we walk together with other Christ followers, or it's just much harder to even try to do it alone. I don't know. You mentioned that you can follow God alone, and I mean, if you're in prison or something like that, but even in prison here, like here in Walla Walla, there's Christ followers there who you can gather around, and I don't know.
So I mean, that's the pitch. Blue Mountain Community Church, 10 a.m. on Sundays, right? Skyrocket Church, 10 a.m. on Sundays. We follow God together, and then online, joining us online in our online community. That's following God together. So there's a lot of
that's the pitch, but that's not what I was intending. I mean,
not a pitch, but what I'm saying is, hey, these are very specific avenues. Like this is stuff. If we want to follow God, these are things we can do this week, and take it from the abstract. There's a lot of other churches. You type in churches in Walla Walla, it doesn't have to be ours. There's a lot of groups of Christ followers that are meeting together.
Yeah.
And it's something that, we can do right now. I know at lazy times in my life, COVID was rough, right? Yeah, and so COVID hit. I was in seminary at the time, and I used it as an excuse to not get together with Christ followers, not even online. So the thing it wasn't even because no matter where you are at on the spectrum, it doesn't matter. You can still be in community with people online. This is a new digital way of us connecting with people. But I used it as an excuse for Megan and I to, we're going to, watch a random sermon here and a random sermon there from all these different churches. And I'm going to learn theologically, but there's no accountability. There's no community. There's nothing like that. Yeah. And I know our spiritual life suffered because of that. I don't know. At least for us, the proof was in the pudding of trying to follow Jesus alone was so much harder, than it was in an actual authentic community, whether that's digital or in person.
So anyway, digitally, we're trying to figure out what it looks like to be in community digitally, because it's really easy to still be isolated. Well, here's two things. It's really easy to be isolated digitally, and, you can watch, any church service anywhere in the world if you want, and not be connected to anybody else. But at the same time, you can go to church and sit in the back pew and slide out and really not connect with anybody else.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. So it's easy to go and with a feed me and then go off in our own isolated world. It's another thing, though, to connect with other people and be discipled and disciple them, and kind of walk through life together, because the faith is as much caught as it is taught. So if you're just trying to be taught the faith, a lot of times you're not practicing it because it's all head knowledge. But when when you caught the faith from other people, it's just easier to practice it.
Yeah, because you see it in action as an example for you to follow them.
Yeah, you see it in action, and not only that, you're drawn to it. I mean, you just want to reproduce. You saw that person do it, and you want to do it too.
Yeah. Where do you see God? So, yeah, we're constantly learning more and more about God. We don't have it figured out.
Yeah,
we're seeing stuff all the time that helps us learn more. Where have you seen him recently? What's one way?
You know, I tend to see God, maybe feel God more. Maybe it's where do I feel God more? I tend to feel God when I'm out in nature, when I'm away and from the noise and the confusion, and just draw away by myself and allow my thoughts to be less distracted. That's when I see and feel God more. But I do also see God at work in the lives of people around me. I have an epiphany as I read the Bible. And I'm like, wow, wait, this is, so there's all kinds of little glimpses. And I think that's what we do, is we catch glimpses of God. I don't know. What about you? Where do you see God?
So I want to say I experience God the exact same way. There's a lot of people that claim to experience God very regularly and receive messages, and God told me this, God told me that every day. I don't. Sometimes there's deserts of months. Yeah. Other times it's quite frequent, but it always seems to be whispers or pokes or prods. Recently, wait.
Yeah. Let me go with that a little bit. So, if you see God or you hear God poking and prodding you, what does that feel like?
Yeah, so it depends on the experience. And again, that's why it's good to be in community with other people and share those experiences and ask. So, for example, one of the tiny pokes or prods that I felt, this is 2-3 years ago, and it's really tangible, so it's an easy one to share. I was having a really rough time, and I was really discouraged spiritually.
Okay.
So I'm sitting on this bench, and it's late at night, and I'm just breaking down.
Yeah.
Random guy walks by. He comes, sits by me, puts his hand on my shoulder. I'm not even kidding. This is a kid that I knew, but I didn't know him too well.
Yeah.
And he just says, "Hey, can I pray for you?
Wow.
Can I be with you?" And then he got up and left. And it was tiny, but it really touched me, because it's like I needed that in that moment. Like I needed that, and God knew that I needed that. And so there have been times where people have come and tried to pray for me before too.
Yeah.
Where it's a rough time, and I haven't felt like that presence or whatever. It's hard to explain it. It's just an it, you know? And that's where I was like, boom, that's a poke, that's a prod. So yeah, it's kind of like love. You can't really describe it, but when you know, you know.
Yeah. Okay.
When you know, you know. Recently, I've really gotten to know God more through other people. And so it's been fascinating. I've learned so much at Skyrocket. It's been beautiful to witness. A lot of people have made the decision to follow God for the first time, or very new at following Jesus.
Fantastic.
And I have found myself learning more from them than they're learning from me, from their faith. And it's I don't know. It's been amazing to see their faith, and I've learned so much. And so that's where I've sort of sensed God, is it's sort of been this renewal of spirit. Being in ministry, studying the Bible, a lot of times it can get wearisome. Just being quite frank and quite honest with all of you, it can get wearisome and boring. But to see these people experience Jesus and to begin to follow them, I have learned so much from their attitude, their approach, and even just their daily walk and their daily practice. And so that's one way that I've really sensed God's presence and seen God, if that makes sense, recently.
Totally. And I appreciate you sharing it and the vulnerability there. I saw emotion in that, and it's great.
You can't see it. There was emotion.
Well, there was, yeah. And that's incredible. Do you ever find sometimes that, so the whole Footprints in the Sand poem, that's really famous. Do you ever find that as you look back on a situation, you're like, oh, wait a second. Mm-hmm. Maybe God was there, and wait, maybe he was there too. And you kind of sense that in the moment, you might not have seen what God was up to, but as you look back on it, okay.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. Megan and I did not want to move to Walla Walla. We were looking at jobs in Spokane and Tri-Cities, applying to a bunch of stuff. And we were so discouraged because I kept having interviews and they weren't working out. Rejection. And so I felt like a complete failure. I was really discouraged. And then we're like, okay, we'll stop fighting it. We'll go to Walla Walla. I remember reaching out to you. Looking back now, God was there.
Yeah.
And God was moving and God was so present. But in the moment, it did not feel like that at all. And so, yes, 100%, there's times where we'll look back in life and be like, it's so obvious that God was there and that he was present and moving. But in the moment, it doesn't always feel like that.
Absolutely.
What about you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, that's the theme of my life. A big thing for us was, we felt like God was calling us. This was years ago now, calling us to plant a church in the Kansas City area, and it was Sacred Journey was its name, and it was a new design and it was a new model, and we experienced all kinds of resistance, and it didn't fly. I mean, it just didn't work for a lot of reasons. 50% of those reasons being me. But the other 50 being some other things too. But in the end, I look back on that and I think even God was even in that, what I consider a failure, but it wasn't a failure. It was an experience that was shaping and that kind of thing. But even as I look back at that, God was even in that, though I couldn't feel it at the time.
And that's, it seems funny that both of the stories we shared, we both felt like failures, experienced rejection. And that's the God that we worship, a God who redeems broken circumstances, failures and rejection, and he redeems them and uses them for his glory. And that's just awesome. I don't know.
It is awesome. So I'm thinking about, the church in Prescott that was before Skyrocket, and how, it eventually just kind of, the leadership there felt like, we're actually not accomplishing our mission. Now let's go ahead and pull the plug. So that church sat empty for 2.5, 3 years. And then Skyrocket comes in, and suddenly there's new life and there's new excitement, and the entire town is hungry for a church in a sense where they'd kind of forgotten that they needed something like that. And even in the closing of the one, there was birth of another, and God was in it all the way. Yeah, it's amazing. So,
God's everywhere. We just might not see him until 1 week, 1 month, 1 year down the road.
Yeah.
And so stick with it.
But as soon as somebody comes up to me and says, well, God told me to tell you, I'm like, whoa, no. Okay. And it's not that God never speaks to somebody that way. It's just, as soon as somebody says that, I get suspicious as to, okay, what's coming next. Because
it's because it's not the God that I know. It's not the way. So maybe it's true. Yeah. But that's not the God that I know.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah, I've never had the burning bush experience.
I'm not. So. I've begged for one, but I've never had one.
Good stuff. Anyways. All right. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. Anything else?
I don't think so. This is exciting stuff, figuring out who God is, and it's a lifelong journey. So it's been fun just talking a short 1 hour about it, but it's something to talk about the rest of our lives. So
absolutely. And who knows if you want to send in questions, can you put them in the comments on the YouTube video? Okay. Send in some questions, and we'll try to get to those too, because we've been enjoying whatever the questions are that are coming in.
No, it's been an absolute blast talking about why this matters. Why Monday matters. So
absolutely
great.
All right. Yeah. Yep. See you next Monday.